If Patton didn't move in time, the 101st Airborne would have been annihilated. Not captured, not forced to surrender. Annihilated. December 1944. The Screaming Eagles were encircled at Bastogne. Ammunition vanishing by the hour. Medical supplies exhausted. German panzers tightening the noose from every direction. Berlin had issued the order personally. Total destruction of the American defenders. The weather was so brutal that Allied aircraft couldn't penetrate the clouds. No resupply, no reinforcements, no escape. No one was coming to save them. Except one man refused to accept that reality. This is the moment Eisenhower realized Patton might be the only general who could save not just a division, but the entire momentum of the war. And what he really said when Patton actually pulled off the impossible. A story of a desperate gamble, frozen men holding against impossible odds, and the decision that changed everything. Days. That's all the 101st had left. This is what happened next. Before we dive into this story, subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Every view helps bring more stories like this to life. December 19th, 1944. The Situation Room at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force was thick with tension, silent except for the steady voices delivering catastrophic news. German forces had smashed through American lines in the Ardennes forest, punching deep into Allied territory and creating chaos across a 50-mile front. Entire regiments were in disarray. Communications were fragmentary. The map looked like it was collapsing. But the worst news concerned Bastogne, a small Belgian crossroads that nobody outside military planners had heard of a week ago, but was now the most strategically vital position in Western Europe. The 101st Airborne Division, along with supporting units, was completely surrounded. Over 10,000 American soldiers trapped with no escape route. German forces encircling them, artillery zeroed in, armor probing every defensive position. Worse, the weather had grounded the entire Allied air fleet, eliminating air resupply and close air support, the two lifelines paratroopers depended on to survive when cut off. Eisenhower stood before the operational map, eyes tracing the bulge in Allied lines, the surrounded position at Bastogne marked in red. His face was drawn, deeply exhausted. He'd barely slept since the German offensive erupted 3 days earlier. Intelligence officers briefed him on the 101st's situation minute by minute, and each update was grimmer than the last. Ammunition rationed to mere handfuls per soldier. Artillery shells nearly depleted. Guns falling silent across the perimeter. Medical supplies running out. Wounded paratroopers packed into freezing Belgian basements because there was nowhere else to treat them. Food dwindling. Fuel almost gone. And German attacks were intensifying. To understand how close the Allies came to catastrophe, and why Eisenhower's decision to trust Patton was so fraught with risk, you have to go back to the beginning. The German strike that nobody saw coming. December 16th, 1944. 5:30 a.m. The Ardennes forest erupted. Over 200,000 German troops, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks, smashed into thinly held American positions along an 80-mile front. The assault was massive, coordinated, and completely unexpected. Allied intelligence had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They believed the Germans were too depleted, too broken to launch anything more than localized counterattacks. The Ardennes, densely forested, mountainous, bisected by narrow roads, was considered a quiet sector where green divisions could get combat experience and veteran units could rest. The Germans knew this. They exploited it perfectly. Heavy fog and low clouds blanketed the battlefield, grounding Allied reconnaissance aircraft. American units couldn't see what was coming until panzers were already breaking through their lines. Terrain that made the Ardennes impassable for armor actually concealed German formations until the last moment. Within hours, American defenses collapsed across a 50-mile stretch. Entire regiments were overrun, captured, or scattered. Chaos spread through command posts as officers struggled to understand the scale of the attack. At the center of the German thrust sat Bastogne, an unremarkable Belgian town of 4,000 people. But Bastogne controlled 7 major roads, radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. Every highway through the Ardennes passed through it. The Germans needed Bastogne to sustain their offensive momentum. Without it, their armored spearheads would strangle on clogged secondary roads. The Allies needed Bastogne to anchor any defensive response. Lose it, and German tanks could race toward the Meuse River, potentially splitting Allied forces in half. When Eisenhower grasped how far the Germans had penetrated, the blood drained from his face. This wasn't a raid. It was an all-or-nothing gamble to reverse the war. He gave immediate orders. Get the 101st Airborne to Bastogne, now. The paratroopers raced north in freezing darkness, trucks skidding on icy roads. They reached Bastogne on December 19th, just hours before German forces sealed every road leading out. The trap had closed. By December 20th, German armor had sealed every road. The 101st was completely encircled. What followed was a nightmare of cold, fire, and attrition. Temperatures plunged below freezing. Paratroopers huddled in snow-filled foxholes wearing summer-weight uniforms. They'd deployed so rapidly, there'd been no time to issue winter gear. Frostbite became as dangerous as German shells. Men wrapped themselves in anything they could find. Curtains, tablecloths, parachute silk. Ammunition was strictly rationed. Rifle rounds counted individually. Artillery batteries went silent, their crews saving the last few shells for critical moments. Machine gunners fired in short, disciplined bursts. Every bullet had to count. Medical stations overflowed with wounded. Surgeons operated in freezing Belgian basements by candlelight, without adequate bandages, anesthesia, or plasma. Men screamed through amputations. Others died quietly from wounds that would have been survivable with proper supplies. German loudspeakers blared surrender demands across the lines. Leaflets fluttered down, promising hot food, medical care, and safety. Some American soldiers wavered. The strain was breaking men. Then, on December 22nd, German commanders delivered a formal ultimatum to Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe: surrender Bastogne or face annihilation. McAuliffe read the message, considered for exactly 1 moment, and replied with a single word: nuts. When confused German officers asked for clarification, an American captain translated, "It means, go to hell." The reply electrified the 101st. Men laughed in frozen foxholes. The word spread through defensive positions like wildfire. Nuts became a battle cry, a symbol of American defiance against impossible odds. But at Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower wasn't laughing. Intelligence reports painted a grim picture. The 101st had days left, maybe less. Ammunition nearly gone. Medical supplies exhausted. German pressure intensifying. Eisenhower stared at the map, jaw tight, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. He turned to his staff. "Get me Patton." December 19th, 1944, Verdun, France. Eisenhower convened an emergency conference of his top commanders in a cold, drafty room. The atmosphere was tense, almost funereal. Maps covered the tables, showing the Bulge and Allied lines growing like a cancer. Eisenhower's question was direct. How soon can you counterattack to relieve Bastogne? One by one, generals offered cautious estimates. 10 days to reposition forces, 2 weeks to properly organize logistics, 3 weeks to guarantee success. Each answer was methodical, reasonable, and too slow. Then Patton spoke. "I can attack on the 22nd, 48 hours from now." The room fell silent. Several officers exchanged glances. Some thought Patton was joking. Others thought he'd lost his mind. Patton wasn't joking. He revealed what no one else knew. His staff had already prepared 3 contingency plans for pivoting 3rd Army north. He'd anticipated this crisis before it happened. His divisions were ready to disengage, turn 90 degrees, march over 100 miles through winter conditions, and launch a coordinated assault. Most generals thought it operationally impossible. Eisenhower studied Patton's face, searching for bravado or recklessness. What he saw was cold certainty. But Eisenhower knew Patton. Brilliant, aggressive, capable of miracles. Also volatile, glory-seeking, sometimes too bold for his own good. Trusting Patton meant gambling with the lives of 10,000 surrounded men. If Patton failed, the 101st would be annihilated. The German offensive might reach the Meuse. Allied momentum could collapse entirely. Eisenhower leaned forward, voice quiet but hard. "George, if you commit to this and fail, thousands of men will die. Can you do it?" Patton didn't hesitate. "I can do it." The room held its breath. Eisenhower made his decision. "Then do it. Get to Bastogne. Save the 101st. He'd just handed Patton the most critical mission of the European campaign and trusted him with everything that mattered. The race against time had begun. What Patton proposed was unprecedented in modern warfare. Pivot an entire army. Over 250,000 men, thousands of vehicles, hundreds of tanks and artillery pieces. 90 degrees in the middle of winter, then attack within 48 hours. Military theorists said it couldn't be done. Patton did it anyway. Orders cascaded down the 3rd Army chain of command with brutal clarity. Disengage from current operations, turn north, march day and night. No rest, no delays, get to Bastogne. The logistical challenges were staggering. Roads choked with ice and snow, convoys stretching for miles, grinding forward in sub-zero darkness. Fuel trucks struggling to keep pace with advancing columns. Entire divisions maneuvering across frozen terrain in total blackout conditions to avoid German air attacks. German forces hit the flanks relentlessly. Ambushes, artillery strikes, desperate counterattacks trying to slow the advance. Patton's troops fought through every obstacle, maintaining momentum even when progress measured in blood-soaked yards. Officers who'd doubted Patton's timeline watched in amazement as units reached checkpoints ahead of schedule. His operational planning was flawless. His staff worked around the clock coordinating movements that military academies would study for generations. At Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower tracked Patton's progress obsessively. Pins moved on maps. Updates arrived hourly. The 3rd Army was advancing, faster than anyone thought possible. But it wasn't fast enough. Weather still sealed the skies over Bastogne. No aircraft could penetrate the clouds. The 101st remained cut off, starving, bleeding out slowly in frozen foxholes. Intelligence reports grew darker. German attacks intensifying. American ammunition nearly exhausted. Medical supplies gone, casualties mounting. Eisenhower calculated the math grimly. Patton was racing north at maximum speed. But Bastogne was dying faster. The question burning through headquarters wasn't whether Patton would arrive. It was whether he'd arrive in time to find anyone left alive to save. December 23rd, 24th. The siege reached its breaking point. German artillery hammered Bastogne without pause. Shells screamed down every 15 minutes, cratering streets, collapsing buildings, shredding defensive positions. Panzer attacks probed the perimeter constantly, searching for weakness. Tank rounds punched through walls where paratroopers sheltered. Fighting devolved into brutal close-quarters combat. Men grappled in fog-shrouded forests, firing at muzzle, flashes in swirling snow. Bayonets, grenades, desperate struggles in smoke and darkness where you couldn't tell friend from enemy until it was too late. Medics worked past exhaustion in blood-soaked basements. No morphine left, no bandages. Surgeons amputated with whatever tools remained, while wounded men bit down on leather straps and screamed. Ammunition stocks approached zero. Artillery crews hoarded their last shells. Riflemen carried 5 rounds, sometimes fewer. Machine gunners went silent to save ammunition for the final assault everyone knew was coming. Morale fractured at the edges. Men whispered that relief wasn't coming, that they'd been abandoned, that Patton was a myth. Christmas Eve, 1944. Paratroopers fought through freezing darkness with nearly nothing left. German attacks surged against exhausted defenders who could barely return fire. Snow turned red. Foxholes became graves. At Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower sat alone in his office, staring at casualty projections. He mentally drafted condolence letters to families of 10,000 men, considered how to explain losing an entire elite division, faced the possibility that his gamble on Patton had failed, and that failure would haunt him forever. This was his darkest hour as Supreme Commander. Then, on Christmas morning, something changed. The clouds thinned. Patches of blue appeared through the gray. For the first time in over a week, the skies began to clear. December 25th, 1944. Christmas morning. Paratroopers in frozen foxholes looked up and saw something they'd stopped believing in. Clear sky. Then they heard the engines. C-47 transport planes roared overhead in massive formations, dozens, then hundreds. Parachutes blossomed across the sky like flowers blooming in winter. Bundles tumbled earthward, carrying ammunition, medical supplies, food, fuel. Men who'd been too exhausted to speak began shouting, cheering. Some wept openly. Supply crates crashed into snow-covered fields. Paratroopers scrambled to retrieve them, ripping open containers with bare hands. Artillery crews loaded fresh shells, riflemen stuffed magazines with new rounds. Medics clutched bandages and morphine like sacred relics. Allied fighter bombers followed the transports, screaming down on German positions. P-47 Thunderbolts strafed tank columns. Bombs erupted across enemy artillery emplacements. For the first time in days, the Germans were the ones cowering under fire. Hope surged through Bastogne's defenders like electricity. But everyone knew. Resupply bought time, nothing more. The siege remained unbroken. German forces still surrounded the town, regrouping, preparing new attacks. Ammunition would run out again. The 101st still needed a breakthrough from the ground. And that breakthrough was still fighting its way north, yard by bloody yard. Patton drove his men relentlessly. Sleep was a luxury no one could afford. Every mile meant another firefight. German defenders contested every bridge, every crossroads, every tree line. Third Army casualties mounted, but momentum never stopped. At Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower monitored Patton's advance minute by minute. Pins moved across the map, 20 miles from Bastogne, 15, 10. The weather had given the 101st a lifeline. But the math was razor thin. The paratroopers could hold now, barely. The question remained whether Patton would arrive before that slender thread finally snapped. December 26, 1944. Patton's 4th Armored Division slammed into German positions south of Bastogne with everything they had left. Tank rounds, artillery barrages, infantry assaults through fog so thick men couldn't see 10 yards ahead. German defenders fought desperately to hold the corridor closed. Panzerfausts streaked through the mist. Machine gun fire raked American positions. Anti-tank guns turned the final approaches into a killing ground. But nothing could stop the momentum Patton had built. American tanks punched through one defensive line, then another. Infantry followed, clearing roadblocks in vicious close-quarters fighting. Smoke, gunfire, chaos. And then, suddenly, open road ahead. Late afternoon, 4:45 p.m. Lead elements of the 4th Armored made contact with forward positions of the 101st Airborne. For a moment, soldiers from both units just stared at each other through the smoke, unable to believe what they were seeing. Then joy erupted. Men embraced. Paratroopers who hadn't smiled in a week laughed until they cried. The siege was broken. Bastogne was relieved. Word flashed to Supreme Headquarters. Contact made. Corridor open. 101st holding. Eisenhower received the message and closed his eyes. The exhaustion that had carved lines into his face for 10 days seemed to lift all at once. He exhaled, a long, shuddering breath of relief, gratitude, and awe. Publicly, he praised the operation as one of the most brilliant maneuvers of the war. Privately, in his quarters that night, he admitted to his staff what he'd really felt. The cold terror that Patton might fail. The weight of gambling with 10,000 lives. The certainty that if Bastogne fell, the blame would rest on his shoulders alone. Patton did more than relieve a town, Eisenhower said quietly. He saved the momentum of this entire campaign. The gamble had paid off. In the weeks following Bastogne's relief, Eisenhower carefully evaluated what Patton had accomplished. Publicly, he called it one of the most astonishing achievements of the war. A maneuver that military historians would study for generations. Pivoting an entire army in 48 hours under winter conditions, while sustaining an offensive defied conventional military theory. Privately, Eisenhower's reflections went deeper. In his memoirs and later interviews, he admitted that Patton had saved far more than a single division. The relief of Bastogne broke the German offensive's momentum at its critical moment. It proved to German high command that their gamble had failed. It demonstrated to Allied troops and the world that American forces could absorb a devastating surprise attack and strike back with stunning speed. Historians later recognized Bastogne as the turning point of the Battle of the Bulge. After December 26th, the German advance stalled, then collapsed. The war's outcome was no longer in doubt. The 101st Airborne went on to fight through the remainder of the European campaign, their legend cemented forever. Nuts became immortal. Bastogne became sacred ground. Patton's legacy, through Eisenhower's eyes, was complex. A brilliant, flawed commander capable of miracles when the stakes were highest. Difficult, temperamental, often infuriating. But when it mattered most, irreplaceable. The relief of Bastogne was never just a military operation. It was a testament to the courage of paratroopers who refused to surrender. To the audacity of a general who promised the impossible and delivered. To a supreme commander who made the hardest decision of his career, trusting one volatile genius with the lives of 10,000 men and the fate of the entire campaign. What Eisenhower really meant when he acknowledged Patton's achievement wasn't just gratitude. It was recognition that some moments in history demand leaders willing to attempt the impossible, and the courage to trust them when they do. If this story of impossible odds, desperate decisions, and the words that defined legends moved you, subscribe to this channel now. We're bringing you the untold moments, the private words, and the human drama behind history's greatest battles. Hit that notification bell, drop a comment about leadership under pressure, and share this with anyone who needs to hear about what's possible when someone refuses to accept defeat. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most difficult people achieve the most extraordinary